Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, January 26th, day 478 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military reporter Emmanuel Fabian and reporter Amy Spiro, who is filling in for several weeks on the diplomacy beat. Thank you both for joining me.
Hi, Amanda.
Thanks for having me.
So today is ostensibly the final day of the 60-day truce in Lebanon, and so far things really haven't progressed as planned. So in the second half of our program, we'll delve into what's happening and not on the ground. But first, we'll have more updates on the aftermath of yesterday's release of 4 female Israeli soldiers and complications with the ceasefire deal in Gaza. We'll also hear U.S. President Donald Trump's partial solution to Gaza's residents on the day after, and learn about Israel's candidate for this year's Eurovision Song Contest. All this and much, much more when we're back. Yesterday, 4 female soldiers held in Gaza for 477 days were reunited with their loved ones. They are Karina Ariev, Daniella Gilboa, Naama Levy, and Liri Albag. They were greeted with smiles and tears after the release from captivity, and they are but 4 of the 7 abducted surveillance soldiers who were taken from Nahal Oz IDF base on October 7th. Previously, 1 soldier was rescued from Gaza and 1 body was returned. There is now 1 final female soldier in Gaza, Agam Berger. Manny, we spoke yesterday about the young women's release, including the very bizarre stage ceremony that was put on in Gaza City. So listeners, please check yesterday's podcast for more on that. But today, are you hearing any additional details yet about the Hamas violations to the ceasefire deal surrounding civilian hostage Arbel Yehud and Israel's decision to pause in implementing the pulling out from part of Netzarim Corridor to allow Gazans to move to the northern part of the Strip?
So we've seen Hamas now publish an official statement. It has guaranteed that Arbel Yehud will be released. They say she is alive, and this is supposed to be, according to Hamas, enough for Israel to accept this and move on and open the Netzarim Corridor. So far, we haven't seen a new statement from Israel regarding this. We've seen the army warn Palestinians not to return. They haven't been returning. There's thousands of Palestinians currently waiting on the coastal road, trying to return to North Gaza, but nobody's going through yet. So we have to wait and see if this Hamas claim, these guarantees that it's saying it is provided, are enough for Israel to accept this and move along with the deal. But otherwise, we are in a situation where Israel has demanded that Arbel had, be released over the weekend, and that didn't happen. And in addition, we also have the issue of Hamas not providing the names or the list or the details of the remaining living hostages in the group of 33, or currently now down to 26, of those who are supposed to be released in this coming phase of the ceasefire.
Amy, what are we hearing from official Israel about the lack of this list?
Yeah, officially, publicly, they're being very quiet. They haven't been threatening necessarily anything in regards to that list, which under the terms of the deal was supposed to be provided by yesterday. The Prime Minister's office hasn't said anything. It's unclear, if they're waiting to give Hamas more of a chance to come up with this list. But right now, we're not seeing the sort of threats that we saw in the points leading up to the signing of the deal when it was accusing it of all sorts of violations. Obviously, the issue of Arbel Yehud, they've been more vocal on. So at this point, we're sort of waiting to see what transpires throughout the day.
So, Manny, where is the IDF currently in Gaza?
It's still in the same areas as it was before. So the entire Netzarim Corridor and around all the edges of Gaza. So along the entire Israel-Gaza border, and as well as the Egypt-Gaza border, also known as the Philadelphia Corridor, the army has warned Palestinians not to approach those areas, and the army will remain deployed in those areas. The only place where, in this first stage of the deal, that Israel was supposed to withdraw from was the Netzarim Corridor, first from the coastal road area, basically the northern part of Netzarim, and later on from the entire corridor to allow also the Salah ad-Din road, which is more in the center, closer to Israel's border, for for Palestinians to go through that. That's supposed to happen on day 22, which will be after Saturday. So we don't know yet if these issues will be resolved by then. Likely they will be, because at least according to what Hamas has been saying, Arbel Yehud will likely be released this coming Saturday and not any later. But that's for sure not something that's for certain. We don't know exactly. Hamas could change things at the last minute, as we've seen them do already before.
So new U.S. President Donald Trump said yesterday that he'd like to see Jordan, Egypt, and other Arab nations increase the number of Palestinian refugees they're accepting from the Gaza Strip, potentially moving out enough of the population to, quote, just clean out the war-torn area and create a virtual clean slate, presumably for a rebuild. Amy, what are you hearing about this?
You know, the news has obviously been welcomed by elements of Netanyahu's government, the usual suspects, so Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich and some elements of his Likud party, people who've advocated something like this for many years. Obviously, Trump saying this is not the first time anyone has suggested this, but no one really is taking such an idea seriously. This is not something Jordan would ever agree to. This is not something Egypt would ever agree to. We saw over 15 months of war, they accepted virtually no refugees whatsoever. The likelihood of that changing now, temporary, permanently, anything like that, the idea that the Saudis would be on board with this, it's just not a very realistic point of view. Trump, obviously, we saw during his first term, he says all sorts of things and different people get in his ear. And, it could be someone who's mentioned this to him recently. I mean, he spoke with King Abdullah on Saturday. He says he brought it up. But I think in terms of, an actual realistic idea, it's highly unlikely.
Manny, I heard this and I had to wonder if perhaps the seed was planted when Trump heard that some of the Palestinian security prisoners, some 70 of the, I believe, 200, were actually deported from the Gaza/Israel/West Bank territory, and perhaps also to Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. What do you know about that?
So yeah, they were deported to Egypt, but I think that's just sort of a connection to wherever else they're heading to. That's where, under the agreement, because Egypt is one of the mediators along with Qatar, that is where they send them to. Israel doesn't share a border with Qatar, so we can't send them there directly. But those who are deported from the Israel and Palestinian territories area go via Egypt, and then from there they'll go to another country. They may stay in Egypt, they may go to Turkey or Qatar or whichever other Hamas supporting country in our region.
Let's go to a short break and then concentrate on Lebanon. And we're back. The initial 60-day truce in Lebanon has run out. And this morning, the Lebanese army is calling on its civilians to, quote, exercise self-restraint and follow its instructions as people begin to return to the villages in South Lebanon, despite the IDF presence there. It's a very interesting statement that was issued. The Lebanese Armed Forces says it is accompanying civilians entering several villages in South Lebanon, quote, amid the Israeli enemy's persistence in violating Lebanon's sovereignty, its attacks on citizens, causing martyrs and wounded among them, and its refusal to abide by the ceasefire agreement and withdraw from the Lebanese territories it occupied. So, Manny, let's start with you. And to the best of your knowledge, how is the IDF currently deployed in Lebanon? And how does this correspond to the timeline of the truce deal?
So right now, the IDF is deployed mostly in the eastern sector of southern Lebanon, so near Kiryat Shmona, that sort of area. Less on the western area near the coast. Israel withdrew from that area several weeks ago, and the Lebanese army took responsibility for it. Most villages, not all of them. The army is still deployed in some of those villages, and what we saw today is civilians and Hezbollah supporters and protesters trying to reach these villages. Some were carrying Hezbollah flags and photos of Nasrallah, and the army has been firing warning shots and apparently opening fire directly at people. There's reports of 3 killed and some 30 wounded. The IDF hasn't yet issued a comment on its actions. It only warned last night that Lebanese people should not return to any of these villages on the border. So I don't know to tell you exactly how long it'll take for Israel to complete the withdrawal, because according to Israel, at least, it all depends on Lebanon and how quickly the Lebanese army is deploying to the areas where Israel wants to prevent Hezbollah from establishing itself. So it could be another 30 days, as some reports have suggested. It could be longer. It could be a week, or it could be today they quickly sort this out and quickly deploy to all the villages. I don't think that's going to happen that quickly. But right now, it doesn't seem like the ceasefire has completely fallen apart. We haven't seen, as of recording at least, Hezbollah firing rockets again at Israel or Hezbollah carrying out attacks on troops. We are seeing the army firing warning shots and sometimes direct fire, and the Lebanese army trying to coordinate matters, trying to escort civilians into villages to make sure they don't come under fire by Israel. But there's no direct clashes right now. So it could be that this ceasefire just holds and then there is some sort of extension and the matter is resolved.
Amy, there are a lot of new variables since this ceasefire was mediated. Of course, there's a new Lebanese government, there's a new U.S. government. And let's just start with Israel. For its part, what are you hearing from the Prime Minister's office about Israel's intentions?
Yeah, I mean, Israel was sort of sending messages for weeks before this deadline, that was essentially early this morning, that there was a good chance it wasn't going to meet, that deadline for withdrawal, blaming it on Hezbollah and the Lebanese army not meeting its own requirements under the terms of the deal. And then on Friday, the Prime Minister's office, made it official and basically said, they haven't pulled back to where they're supposed to be, so we will also be delayed in doing so. But it's not, you're not hearing a large appetite for a return to fighting. You're not hearing a desire to back out of the deal, right? I mean, certainly with the Hamas ceasefire, Netanyahu has made it clear repeatedly, we will return to fighting if we need to. That's not rhetoric that you've heard in this instance. The new Lebanese government that was, recently installed, they've made it pretty clear that they also want this to be carried out. They want to see this through. The new prime minister has said, we're going to be deploying in southern Lebanon. We're going to get rid of all the Israeli forces there. So they have an interest. We haven't heard Trump say much about Lebanon. He's spoken a lot in the week since he's taken office. He hasn't commented much on that, but it's hard to imagine he has any reason to want to see this fall apart.
And Manny, just super briefly, I know there's not much news here, but what are we hearing about Israel's deployment in the buffer zone in Syria?
So very little information is coming from the Israeli side on what's going on there. It seems mostly to have calmed down. There were a few incidents a few weeks ago of, I would say, friction between the army and Syrian civilians and even some journalists in the area. The army detained some journalists there and then later released them. But right now it does appear to be mostly calm. The army has been finding weapons that belong to the former Syrian army and been seizing them. But I haven't seen any major unusual incidents there. I will note that this morning we saw Syrian authorities announce that they captured a shipment of weapons that was supposed to head for Hezbollah in Lebanon. So Israel has warned that it doesn't want any weapons reaching Hezbollah, weapons that are either from Syria or arriving from other countries, from Iran or somewhere else. So we are seeing that the new Syrian government is actually, of course, they are very anti-Iran and anti-Hezbollah. We are seeing them as well capture weapons that are supposed to head for Hezbollah. This is now the second time, I think, in the last couple of weeks that I've seen Syria announce that it's prevented weapons from reaching the Lebanese terror group.
Right. I noted that. And also last week I believe that the de facto leadership is demanding that Israel leave this buffer zone and promises, of course, no further aggression to Israel. Do you see any chance that Israel will be leaving the buffer zone anytime soon?
I'm not sure it's really up to the IDF at this point. It's more whatever the defense minister and prime minister decide, and from the rhetoric we've seen from them is that Israel will stay there at least through the winter months and maybe even permanently in some certain areas. From the army's point of view, I'm not really sure they feel the need to be there any longer. There isn't much of a threat currently, but it really depends on what they present to the Israeli political officials and if they tell them that there's no real threat and they don't need to be there, then maybe they can convince them to leave. But right now, it seems like Israel will be staying there for at least the coming period.
Amy, let's end with the bittersweet win of Yuval Raphael, who is a survivor of the Hamas attack on the Nova Music Festival. And Yuval will represent Israel at the 2025 Eurovision. Tell us a little bit about Yuval.
Yes, so as you said, Yuval, she won the Kochav Haba Rising Star reality TV contest last week, which essentially grants her the chance to represent Israel at the contest in Switzerland, which will be in May. She has no real, professional singing experience. She really has never performed on, any sort of stage, recorded any music or anything like that. As you said, she was at the Nova Festival on October 7th with a group of friends. She fled. She ended up hiding in the very back corner of a word that's become very commonplace in Israel recently, a migunit, which is, one of these sort of roadside bomb shelters that don't have a door. And she was there for 8 hours, essentially hiding under piles of dead bodies and pretending to be dead. And she said sort of every, 20, 30 minutes, a truck of Hamas terrorists would drive past, come in, open fire on everyone, assuming that everyone in there was dead and move on. And out of about 45 people who were in there, only 11 of them survived, and she was one of them. And she's actually spent, the past 15 months speaking about her experiences around the world. She, appeared at the UN Human Rights Council, and, she said in interviews, and she's one that, first of all, she's gone through, something so horrific, and that music has been a big part of her recovery process. And, she said, faced with the idea that she's going to be facing, boos on the Eurovision stage, she said she's sort of ready for anything that they can throw at her. So we'll be watching and we'll see what happens.
We, of course, don't know yet about the song, correct?
Right. So Khan, the Israeli public broadcaster, will release the song in March. So right now they're going through the process. People are submitting songs. They'll pick one. Obviously, it can't have any political notes. It does have to include some Hebrew. In the past, for a while, Israel is essentially sending songs that are mostly English and include a couple lines of Hebrew, and that's probably the case here as well.
And Amy, what do you think her chances are? You have been covering the Eurovision for so long, and were you happy that she was chosen above, for example, a puppet troupe that also was one of the leading candidates? And in fact, my own daughter voted for them.
I can't say I cast my vote. I can't weigh in on my personal preferences. I think the puppet would have been a very interesting choice. Yuval has a great voice. She's obviously, though, very untested when it comes to international. I think it will come down to the song. And I think, if I'm being honest, the votes, for and against Israel at the Eurovision will likely not necessarily be song or singer related this year. Obviously, there are always the Eurovision diehards who do truly vote on the music, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that, some of Eden Golan's support, if not a lot of Eden Golan's support last year, was not necessarily music related.
Amy and Manny, thank you both for joining me today and bringing your insights and updates.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.